Hey, thanks for checking out the webinar. I'm Jay Moss, and I promise at the end of this, your drums will sound better. And if you stick around to the end, I'll give you guys all a bunch of free raw drums that you can practice on. So definitely stick around. For those of you who don't know who I am, I've been a professional audio engineer now for about 15 years. I've traveled the world doing records in Europe and Australia and all over the US. I've worked for major record labels, I've worked for major independents, I've worked for independent artists. I've had probably, at this point I've lost count, I've had more records in the Billboard charts than I actually know. I probably should look it up on Wikipedia. But today I wanted to bring you guys 3 simple drum tricks that I use on all my drums that will definitely help make your drums more professional, and they're really easy to use. I think that drums really are the bedrock of modern production. If the drums aren't right, the record isn't right. I think one of the big things that really helped elevate me as an engineer and led me to have this be my full-time job was that I figured out drums early on. It's kind of the most intimidating part, but I think one thing that people do is they overcomplicate it and they end up causing more problems than they're actually solving. So what I'm going to show you guys today is something I do on all my records, and it works for all genres, and this really is the foundation of getting good drums. If you can get this right, the drums will more or less mix themselves, and it's not hard, but it's absolutely integral. So why don't we check that out now and see what's up? Okay, hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the webinar. I'm excited to show you this stuff. Today we're going to be using a session by a band called Color in the Clouds from Canada, and they're a very good band. And we're working on finishing up their LP as we speak, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you guys basically 3 fundamental tricks that I do on drums every record. This record, no exception. And the first one I wanted to talk to you about is phase. Phase is actually very simple in to understand what it is, but getting it right can be kind of complex. Essentially, what phase is, it's the relationship between your microphones in terms of how the capsules are moving. So, for example, you have a snare drum, right? And drummer hits the snare drum, and the top head depresses, and you have a top snare mic here. That's going to pull air away from the capsule. That's going to pull the capsule outward because you're changing the air pressure for that initial hit, I should say. For that moment, you're changing the air pressure in a way where it's going to pull away, so therefore the capsule inside the microphone is going to respond accordingly to that change in air pressure. We'll flip it, think on the bottom of the snare. That same hit is pushing the bottom head down, right? Now you've got a microphone under it, so in that exact same moment, your bottom head is moving down and pushing pressure towards the capsule on the bottom microphone. So what you end up having is you have 2 microphones, say they're placed equidistant from the snare, just top and bottom. You have a hit. That hit is causing very, very similar wave patterns, right? And what can happen, or what does happen, is they're now, instead of them moving in parallel, which is what you want, they're moving in opposition to one another, because as the drum head vibrates, provided it's perfectly in tune, hopefully, as it vibrates the heads together, the capsules will be pulling and pushing in opposition to one another. And what that does is it creates a very thin drum sound. And I hear out of phase drums unfortunately I hear out of phase drums on records all the time. So I'm going to use this session, we're going to zoom in, I'm going to show you how they're in phase. Maybe I'll give you a quick listen to the drums fully mixed, and then I'll show you how they're in phase, and then we'll make them out of phase so that you can hear the difference, and talk a little bit more about what I reference and why. So let's just start by listening to the song a little bit, and I'll solo the drums. We'll just start, I think, at the chorus. Really cool band, really cool song. I have the drums cranked just for the webinar, just because we're dealing with drums specifically. So if anyone's thinking, wow, is that how you're going to mix that? No, not exactly. And let's listen to just the drums here. I'll take this floor tom passage. They sound really good, really natural, but still really powerful. The only drum sample I'm using a little bit is on the kick at the drummer's request. So let's dig into phase. Let's go here. Yeah, like once this breaks, and let's take a look. So this is snare top and this is snare bottom, and I'll make these bigger so it's easier for you guys to check out. All right, what you're gonna notice is that this is already phase corrected, and let me show you what I mean by that. When this file originally came in, before I corrected it, it was upside down. So it looked like, I wonder if I can do it like this. Process, one moment, processes, and then phase reverse. Okay, cool. So I just flipped it. When it came in, it looked like this. See how, and I'll use a cursor to indicate, see how this peak is up, but that peak is simultaneously down? That's a no-no. That's a problem. Let me flip this back to in phase, and we'll listen to this in phase, and then we'll listen to it out of phase, and we'll solo this together. Let me give the bottom snare some level. There we go. So, sounds strong. I mean, obviously the bottom snare is a little loud, but just for this example. Cool. Now, let's bring up our phase button. Every DAW is going to have a phase button somewhere, except Pro Tools, I think. I think in Pro Tools you have to open like a trim plugin. All right, any DAW I use. Let's hear this with a flipped phase. So I'll start it, and then I'll flip it, and then I'll flip it back. And what you should hear, when I flip this and this button goes yellow, that means I've flipped the waveform, and it is going to be wrong, effectively. So we'll go correct, then we'll go wrong. You should hear the drum get really hollow and thin. You'll hear a lot of low end removed. So when you see me hit that button, kind of focus your ears on the low end, and then I'll flip it back and you should hear it come back to life. Do you hear that? Do you hear all the low end that just disappeared the moment I hit that button? Phase is an interesting thing to listen for. As you get better at it and as you record more and more and you work on more and more projects, your ear, once you get good at phase, your ear will really tune itself to hearing things that are out of phase really, really quickly. So here's what happens. Across the entire drum kit, this is happening. So not only can your top and bottom snare be out of phase because they are, the heads are moving in opposition to one another, you can have the exact same problem, but you can have it with the overheads, right? So let me grab overhead left here. Crash left, overhead left, basically same difference. Goodbye, snare bottom. We can probably put this back to a reasonable level. Okay. And again, just so everyone knows, all the drums are phase corrected because we're getting closer to the end of the mix. But you'll see here, more or less, things are going up, down, up. And so phase is only 100% possible to get accurate, or you're really just concerned about this moment right here, this initial impact. The resonance, by the time you get to the resonance of the drum, it's going to be somewhat phase irrelevant. The sound is going to be changing enough and the volume's low enough so that it doesn't make as much of a difference. But in the case of the initial attack of the drum, we really want these things to line up. So I'll give you another example. We'll crank this. We're going to set this to mono, so they're totally stacking on each other. Okay, and let's flip this. Like, do you hear how hollow that gets? And that's the exact same thing. That's another just example of exactly what we just experienced with the bottom snare. So that's in, and then this is out. No low end, it totally disappears. So why is this so important? I mean, clearly you're hearing the sort of the sonic benefits of being in phase, but what happens, unfortunately, all too often, is when people don't understand this first step. This step happens before you do anything else. You set up your microphones, you get happy with the placement, but then you can't really understand a drum mix if you like where you put your microphones, if you like the separation until you go in phase. So when you get your mic somewhere where you think, okay, like this seems like reasonable placement and this is how I want to proceed, when you listen back, chances are you're going to have a bunch of phase problems. So what I recommend is that you come in, you record a pass, right? And then you correct your phase and then listen back, and then you can actually gauge whether or not the choices you made in terms of microphones and mic placement were good ones. And so this is so important that you could have a $30,000 microphone, but a $30,000 microphone out of phase doesn't matter. Give me a handful of SM7s or 57s even, and I've done records with just a handful of SM57s, and they've come out awesome purely because things were done correctly from the ground up, right? We're building the foundation of our house, and this is the first thing. So what people will do when things are out of phase, unfortunately, is they will think like, oh man, like it needs more beef. It just needs more power. It needs more impact. So they start running to their EQs way too soon. And so they start to try to like EQ in bottom end when they have like a fundamental issue. Probably all the bottom end they want is there, and it's going to feel like really good and impactful and natural. But now here we go, trying to solve problems with the wrong tools. So get this right first. That's number one. Once you have your phase right, what we want to do, and this is tip number 2, carve out sonic space for everything. And I'll give you some quick tips on where things are supposed to sit. So let's look at what I did, and I'll kind of walk you through why I did it. Okay, let's see here. Drums, I think everything's back in phase. Let's have a quick listen. Yeah, that sounds really good. Let's check out this fill. Let's just listen to this fill because it's awesome. That's a good fill. So what did we do and why did we do it? Okay, some of this is going to blow your mind. Snare top. It looks like we have an EQ, and it looks like we have some reverb. Let's turn the reverb off so we can hear this a little bit more naturally, and just solo the snare. Okay, so that's my top end. This is my top end. Oh, this is my top snare, and then this is the top end of the snare, and this is some high bass, low mid range. It's kind of riding the cusp there. So what I found is that this is, I believe this was a Black Beauty snare. It has a lower fundamental. I personally found that that was getting a little like doop doop. So I made a small cut here, but it's small. You know, it's a 2.5 decibel cut. And then I made just under a 2.5 decibel boost up here in this EQ range. So typically, this is really common for close mics. On close mics, you're often going to find yourself with weird high bass, low mid-range buildups. As the microphones are really close, it's actually sort of an unnatural place to listen to an instrument, right? Like when we're listening to a drum set, we're certainly not putting our head next to the top snare and being like, okay, play, I'd like to go deaf now. We're typically standing back, but we use close mics in conjunction with other microphones so that we can get more impact and so we can get more separation. You know, when you're multi-micing a drum set and you're using anything more than 2 microphones, you're essentially creating an illusion of what a drum set could sound like, and we get better at creating that illusion. So you'll probably see me do moves like this a lot. And I'll show you, I'll solo the little extra boost here. You can hear that's where sort of the snap of the drum is. I often say that the like crack of the drum is like 1K, and then the snap of the drum is like anywhere from like 3K to 6K, which all falls in here. And here's no EQ. And then here's with. Just a little snappier, not really a big deal. And there'll be some more EQ cuts as we go to like the overheads and stuff. What you might kind of notice is that I didn't have to do a lot. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like that's like the whole premise of what I'm saying is you might be like, wait, that's all you did? And that's a good thing because that means we got it right to begin with. And you'll always see older engineers preaching on about, hey, like, get it right out of the gate, and then you don't have to use a jillion plugins. You can just like do small movements. It'll sound better overall, like way better overall. Whether you know this or not, the more plugins you use, the more aliasing you cause, the more strain on your CPU. You know, it's negligible at first, but with every extra plugin you use, you're degrading the sound of your record. So, having said that, I don't know why that says R. Having said that, my snare bottom doesn't have anything on it. That's straight from the microphone. Awesome. You can hear bottom snare mic is often going to have a lot of kick drum in it, but that can be cool. And this was a Sennheiser MD441. But again, I said, you don't need expensive microphones for this at all. Sure, that's a great microphone to use on bottom snare, but you could put any microphone under there. And again, you get your phase right. In this particular case, I was totally happy with how that sounded. If I was going to do something to this, maybe I would, let me see what I might do. The only thing I might do is you can see that same 200 hertz fundamental. It's the same snare drum, so in the same room. So unsurprisingly, we're seeing that fundamental in the same place, right? I don't think it's the buildup on that wasn't as large as the buildup was on the top snare. So I decided to just leave it natural, not make a move. And it's really snarey snare. You can hear that, like the loose ness of the strainer. So that gave me enough high end up here in that same sort of snap range. I didn't really feel like I had to boost. But if I were to make moves on this, they probably would have been in those areas. But fortunately I didn't. And how cool is that? Like, set up microphone, get phase right, and have a professional record. It's crazy. Let's move on now to the rack tom. Okay, cool. It looks like I did do some stuff here. I used the Steven Slate virtual mixing console here. I really like this. Cool. My moves here don't surprise me at all. So while this is a different type of visualization, if you're not familiar with parametric EQs, this particular one is a copy of a very famous console called an SSL. Down here we have a filter where we can get rid of rumble, low stuff. So I carved out, I know we don't need anything under 40 hertz. Here we go. So I did a boost at 129 because it's a high tom. I wanted to make it sound a little meatier, and that's a pretty big boost. 6 dB, but you're going to see something really similar to the snare here, except the fundamental was different. And that is that I cut at 560. So 560 is obviously a little higher than 200. So this falls directly sort of in low mid-range. This is a really, really common place for me to make a cut on toms. The 500 area is notoriously in need of some cutting. So close mics, you're often going to see that. High bass or low mids, somewhere in that area, you're probably going to have a cut. How much was my cut? That was negative 6.56, so about the same as my boost here. And then I added some top. So at 6.5K, which is upper, like the top of the upper mid range or the bottom of like treble. That is, I did about a 3.5 dB boost, and then it looks like at 7K I did another 1.8 boost. So this is essentially what I'm doing is I'm pulling out, let me show you what this stuff sounds like. Oh wow, and I even went further here. Crazy. So this is, so that's probably that fundamental area that my room makes a lot of this frequency. Yep. So just kind of like the snare drum, we pulled out more here, but I want to show you what 6K sounds like. Here we go. So when I'm boosting 6K, I'm boosting that. And I must have sort of created an interesting curve by boosting before I did a high-end roll-off here. And I was boosting that around 7.5. This won't be too much different sounding than the 6.5. Yeah, but you can hear it's a little higher up. and then this was the other boost. Effectively, all I did was, I'm sorry about that. Effectively, all I did was create some high end. So take out the junk. This stuff is pretty murky. And the other one I did was at, what was it? It was like 5 something. Again, pretty like dark and boxy sounding. So we took that out of the close mics. I added a little bit of compression, but not a ton. Yeah, it's not even registering. I probably would just use this more as a color. They did a really good job with this emulation, and it has a nice, soft, sort of transient rounding nature to it. So what I did is if I'm boosting high end up here, I like that it's more pronounced in the mix, but maybe got a little sharp. So just by adding this, I'm able to round that off. And compounded with Revival, this is adding more weight in the low end, and this is definitely adding more of like this type of stuff, this really high end stuff. So that's probably why I added this. That would be to round off any like irritating sharpness. Not that it would be night and day if I didn't do it, but it's just sort of like an extra little treat. Floor tom, let's do it. Cool. Floor tom is going to be a lot more of the same. These are, I mean, the toms effectively are really similar, right? Like they're both toms, they're just different pitches and different sizes. So it should come as no surprise that what we do, we roll off around 40. We're boosting here at 129 pretty heavily. Same thing, not as much top being added here, but about the same amount of thickness. 560 again, we're cutting that same frequency. 6.5, we're boosting again. So this makes sense, right? Because we're trying to make the toms match and pair them together. So for us to make these boosts and cuts in the same area is not surprising at all. And it looks like I also did another FabFilter thing. Cool. So I didn't feel as though I had to cut the high end here, but where's this? Right. And so the fundamental on this one was just a little bit lower, like the boxiness was a little bit lower than it was on the rack tom. That totally makes sense because the floor tom is a lower drum. So sort of like where that fundamental spike as it reacts with the room and as it reacts with the microphone and the drum itself is unsurprisingly lower. And we can hear that here. So I pulled that. And here's the drum before that cut. And here's after. It's more modern this way. Slicker. I think for the type of mix they wanted, that was the right look. So that's close mics. So effectively what we're typically doing with close mics is we are creating room for the guitars. We're creating room for bass guitar. A lot of time, really important information in guitars and bass guitar is going to live right where we cut in those close mics. Hi-hats. Let's create some room here. A lot of room, clearly. So I have a really big high pass filter here. If you don't know what a high pass filter is, essentially a high pass filter is going to cut low end. It lets high pass through. I have a notch here. This is really interesting. This particular set of hi-hats combined with the microphone, whatever it was I chose to use, created a bit of an annoying whistle. So you'll see I have a general curve, but then I have like this steep cut, and this is called a notch filter. I notched out what I found to be an annoying whistle. So let's find some hi-hats and I'll play that for you. I think we have some right in the beginning. Yep. Cool. So this is with no EQ. Cool. I took a lot out. I really want to show you guys this whistle. Hear that? You might not hear it right away. This is what experience will get you a little bit, but so then now that you've heard that frequency, hear that whistle come back? Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And then hi-hats have a tendency to have like a kind of like a huge surplus in the really high end. So I did a gentle roll off here. This is not unsurprising at all. And so for overheads, you'll see me do this a lot, like especially like spot mic'd overheads, like hi-hat and stuff. I'm going to take out all the low end because I don't really need it. I'm using it to supplement other microphones. This is just to bring the hi-hats and make them feel closer. So that is how I carve out that. Cool. This must have been a dark ride because that's an unusual move for me. I should probably find the part with the ride cymbal. Let's see. There we go. There's one. Yeah, I might even back this off a little bit. I like what I'm doing, but it's a little much. It's better. Same thing, right? We're cutting all this low. Do you want to hear? Here's no EQ. Hear how much smoother it is, especially. Same thing. I went with a wider notch. Here's a fun fact. This frequency, this annoying frequency that I'm notching, right around 3K or 3000 hertz, that's the first frequency that your ear hears. And a lot of people attribute that to the fact that it's right around the same pitch as a baby's cry. And they think it's like, you know, like a biological instinct of ours to be able to hear that first for like evolution reasons. Cool. So that's really similar to that. And let's look at our overheads real quick. Oh, I forgot to pan this back. You go to the left. Cool. What do we do? Same. Totally the same. And what about you? Oh, no notch here. Oh, you know why? Because in overhead left, I have more hi-hat, and that had the more severe whistle, so that doesn't surprise me. Okay, but so what I want to show you guys, right? We're thinking about our drums in zones. The close mics, what do? We cut a lot of low mid or a decent amount of low mid. We reinforce the power areas, which is somewhere around maybe like 120 hertz. And then we would ever so slightly brighten our top end. Our overheads, we're getting rid of a ton of low energy information. We don't really need it because our close mics are providing all of that like in a more dynamic way, in a way that feels more impactful, at least for this particular mix. And so that's the room we created there. Like, so with our overhead move really made a lot of room for our close mics to shine even further in the direction that we already pushed them. The room mics are crushed. And I just want to show you how important these things are. The room mics are an odd bag. You can go a lot of different ways with these. I'm an enormous fan of room mics, almost to a fault. And it looks like I did some moderate cutting here. Let's listen to these, solo those. Oh, actually, I'll just solo them here. That's easier. Let's go. Yeah, that's a cool spot. So why did I cut this? Because it sounds murky. And I probably cut this because it sounded irritating. Back here, right? 3100, 3K, right around there. Once again, we're cutting stuff that sounds kind of like murky because we want a modern mix. And then we're cutting stuff that sounds irritating because cymbals are irritating. Like particularly if we go back to a cymbal passage here. Way better with this cut. The hi-hats, as I said, had a tendency to have a build-up in the super high end. Some people might not even be able to hear it, so I have a gentle roll-off there. And then, like the overheads, but maybe a touch less so, that's a lot of low energy I don't need in the drums because they are, those frequencies, again, are being handled by our close mics. So, and one thing I just real quick, this isn't even part of the tips, but let's call this like tip 2.0, is like when you're mixing, consider mixing your room mics a little bit higher than you would expect because they do a lot. I really want to show you, here's the whole drum mix right now, and then I'm going to show you with and without room mics and what a dramatic effect. I feel like room mics don't get the attention they really deserve, but like we were just saying before, like you'd never listen to a drum when it's right here, right? You are typically listening to drums in like a room mic position. It's the closest approximation that we have to how a drum set actually sounds. And if we just feed our ears things that were recorded from that far away, it feels really unnatural. So I want to show you this passage. I'm going to go room mics on, then I'll mute them, and I'll put them back. It's like a completely different mix. it went like, it was exciting, and then I turned them off, and it just felt like kind of sterile, kind of boring. And so you get your phase right, then you make room for everything. That's step two. You've set yourself up for success, because now that your phase is correct, you can push those room mics up a little bit further than you would, typically expect. And because you've taken out the harsh frequencies, and because you've removed the excess rumble, and you've removed the junk, now you can have more fun playing with things. Like, you've fixed all the problems, so now you just mix how you want to mix. Okay, and then now the last thing, the third trick, is compression. Compression on drums is really common. It's terribly overused, but now that we've sort of built our house correctly, we have all our phase lined up, so we have no problems there. So fundamentally, all of our tones are being well represented. We carved out space for everything based on the sonic character of each individual piece. And we sort of saw how that worked in groups. Now, we're just going to sort of glue it together with some compression. There's a million great drum compressors. This one happens to be an emulation of total classic, the API 2500. And you can, I'll play this passage with, and then without, and then with again, and you'll see it makes an enormous difference. Let me pretend that this... Actually, I'm going to do it with the drum soloed. Totally night and day. And what are we doing? Like max 3 dB of compression? Not a lot. The reason it feels more severe is because I have a really fast attack. The faster your attack, the more you're going to really hear the character of the compression. I wanted something really gluey, and I wanted to hear the character of this compressor because I love it. So I was happy to go with the fastest attack here. Some people would go, say, like maybe like a attack on 1 here, and it's definitely a different vibe. Actually, let's go like all the way to 30, so you can kind of hear the differences. See how the drums got like way more explosive with that faster attack? That's what I was going for here, so that's what I did. So that's kind of it. I mean, in 3 simple tricks, you have a drum mix. You have a professional drum mix. We didn't have to do a lot. We took the junk out of the close mics. We removed the rumble and the annoying things out of the overheads. We brought the room mics in for excitement, and then we kind of sandwiched it all together. You know what I mean? Like, those were pieces of our sandwich. That was like that was our B, our L, our T, if you will. And then we've got our bread with the compression. We're just holding it all together. So that's it. I mean, those are the tips. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got a lot out of it. The drums, while obviously really important, they are, of course, just only one facet of mixing. I've obviously recently released a mixing course, and I take you through everything. I take you through how to go from just setting up your routing to why I color code things a certain way, all the way down through every last thing I do, and show you how to go from here are things that are tracked to here's a professional record, the same way I would do it for any major label, the same way I've done it for records that have won all over these Billboard awards, like everything. So the normal cost of that is $297. But if you use the code DRUMZ, DRUMZ, you actually get it for $197 if you act fast. This is 3 hours of content. You'll save $100. It's professionally shot, and it's like definitely like such a huge value, because I mean, if you were going to come into the studio and try to learn this stuff, it would be thousands and thousands of dollars. So to get that for less than $200 is pretty crazy. You'll be learning from someone who has done it. Yeah, and as a bonus, we're gonna toss in all my plugin presets. So if you want like a really good starting point, you can just put on these presets, and they'll like kind of get you already where we're going. Like a lot of the stuff you saw today, like if you didn't want to have to manually adjust it, you can just toss on my preset. It's going to give you a great starting point, and then you can kind of tweak from there. That's normally $297, but we're just going to throw that in. So the total value of everything that you would get would be about $700, but if you do it now, you can get it for $197, which is like super sweet deal. Again, yeah, I hope you had a really good time. I remember, It's like really awesome for me to be able to provide this stuff now and to be able to be in a position to do this because, I started somewhere, right? Like I remember when I was just down in the basement with a horrible computer and a terrible interface, and that was 15 years ago, and I would have killed to be able to have something like this. And so it just makes me really happy to be able to provide something like this. It's kind of up to you. Like you, of course, can sort of like keep winging it if you want to, but if you want to sort of accelerate your growth, if you want to learn faster, if you want to get better faster, you want to land bigger clients, this could be a really good way to go because everything that I've learned in 15 years, I've sort of put into this package, and you can watch it as many times as you want, and you can practice. We'll give you the full stems to practice on. We'll put you on the fast track to have killer mixes, and if this is what you want to do, even as a hobby or as a living, this is a great way to get there. So thanks so much. And if you want those drums, either way, just email me at j@jmoss.com, and I'll shoot those drums over to you. So I hope you had a blast. I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully we'll do some more free webinars. It's fun for me to give this stuff away for free. Please check out the course and have a blast. Learn, get good.